Anything I say can and will be used against me in a court of law at this point. What's that? That's true. Yeah. All right, I will mute it until we're ready to go. All righty. I guess we should get started. Try to be finished by noon. What I'm going to do is we'll look at the text a little bit, but I really want to get to the application section and have plenty of time for discussion. I found that you know, the text is fairly straightforward, but the commentary by Clinton Arnold on Ephesians just had a wonderful application section where he kind of answers the question, you know, going back to the previous section, you know, wives, what does it mean to submit to your husband? And likewise, husbands, what does it mean to love your wife as Christ loves the church? Actually, there's not a whole lot of suggestions in this text for how you are to do that. And so right away, there, you know, there's kind of a question is 25 through 33, is this meant, is Paul meaning this to be an example of how we are to do that? Or is he using an illustration, you know, for our purposes, okay? So let's review just a little bit. Paul's main purpose in the book of Ephesians, I think, is, again, perfectly summarized in Ephesians 4, chapter 1. It says, therefore, I, prisoner of the Lord, implore you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you have been called. And for the first 3 chapters, he discussed that calling, and we kind of reviewed that last time. And so he kind of brings it to bear here. Here's why I'm writing, so that you walk in a manner worthy of your calling. And that calling was outlined in the first 3 chapters. And chapters 4, 5, and 6 are the more practical aspects of that. And then when we get to chapter 5, which we're in now, he has several commands, again, about walking. Walk in love in verse 2. Walk as children of light in verse 8. Be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise men in verse 15. And then he gives us the command to be filled with the Spirit. And towards the end of that, in verse 21, he says, and be subject to one another in the fear of Christ. And that really provides the immediate context for the discussion on wives, husbands, children, that kind of stuff that comes after that. How is it that we are to subject ourselves one to another? Okay, so like I usually do, I give a poor man's diagram where I just use indentation for the dependent clauses and that kind of stuff, double underlining the main verbs so that we don't miss those. We want to always get the main verbs. And you'll notice that the main verbs here are few in number. Husbands, love your wives. That's a command. Okay, so husbands ought to love, a little bit different construct. It's a indicative ought, to be able, or to ought, and an infinitive to love, but same kind of thing. Husbands ought to love their own wives, and down in verse 33, each individual among you is to love his own wife as himself, and then to the wives, that see to it she respects her husband or fears her husband, that some translations will use. Now, it's really interesting. Starts out here, the first section, the first three verses are kind of one glob here. He says, husbands, love your wives. And then right after that, he goes into a multi-sentence, multi-verse, almost Christological, theological discussion here. Okay, he says, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, so that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. Okay, as we kind of mentioned here, the question is, as Paul moves from talking, the command to love your wives, is he using an illustration here about what Christ has done and his relationship to the church, or is he really meaning to provide examples of how husbands are to do that? I think it may be a little more of both, but there's a clear illustration of the marriage ceremony here that underlies what Paul is saying here, and that's some of the historical background information that I do want to cover when we get to that. Okay, so the word love here, the verb, the command that he gives in verse 25, the verb is from agapao, which means to love in its simplest sense. This is used 6 times in this small section of Ephesians. That same verb is used. Okay, this is a command. It's in the present tense. And what does that mean? Recall that in Greek, the concept of tense is primarily related to the kind of action, not necessarily the time of the action. Okay? So being a present tense command, the sense is that you should be doing this continually. This is a continuous action that should not stop. Okay? And, from here on in. So it really means that husbands, they're to love their wives all the time, continuously, without ceasing. Okay, I think about how difficult it is to obey the command in one of the Thessalonians that says, pray without ceasing. That's a hard command to follow. But the command in the present tense to love your wife is even harder. It's continuous. It's the same sense there. We should be doing this all the time. Now, if you were to do a detailed study, and there's about 4 or 5 different words that are translated love in the English from the Greek, you will find that this particular word, agapao, it is really, we translate it love, but this is the kind of love, it refers to love irrespective of whether the person deserves it or not, which is a very, very interesting use here. Irrespective of merit on the wife's part, the husband is to love the wife, even if she is undeserving or doesn't reciprocate that love to the husband. Okay? Even if the wife is an unloving wife, we are commanded to do that. That is how a husband is to submit to Christ in the family relationship. He is to submit himself to loving his wife no matter what. And we tend to use what word to describe that kind of love? We use the word unconditional. Okay, we use that word unconditional. And I think it has in mind what Paul says here. Now, one very interesting thing that came out of some of the background research that I was doing, did you know that the command to love your wife doesn't have a counterpart in the Old Testament? It doesn't have a counterpart in the Jewish literature of that Second Temple period with the Maccabees and all of that stuff. And it's not iterated in the Greco-Roman literature of that time. I find that very interesting, that there was no standard handbook of marriage for the Roman Empire or the Greek Empire or the Jews that said, this is how you are to treat your wife. You are to love your wife. This is a New Testament, Pauline type command. Now, you may say, well, it does say to love your neighbor as yourself, and in some sense, your wife would be your neighbor, that kind of stuff. Yes, of course you can extrapolate there. But the very specific command, I thought it was interesting that no counterpart in the Old Testament, but it's clearly a New Testament command. And there are commands in the New Testament that are not in the Old. Now, notice how inflexible Paul is with this command. Husbands, love your wives. Doesn't give any conditions on that. He just puts it out there, says, look, this is what you are to do. But then he does go into this sort of Christological illustration here. It talks about just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her so that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of the water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. Okay, this is interesting. What I really want to do is skip a little bit. I really want to save time for the application, so I'll let you go ahead and read some of the things that I put concerning this illustration. Certainly the verb used here, the first one that says, as Christ loved the church, aorist tense, okay, gave himself up for her, aorist tense. Certainly, again, the aorist tense, that suggests a completed action. So it's not ongoing, one time, it's complete. So he gave himself, that's a completed action. He loved the church, completed action, though there's an aspect his love continues. But that really points to the cross. Okay, that is the measure of what he has done in the past to love the church. Okay. I want to skip all the way down to the imagery here. So it would be the paragraph about a little more than halfway down that starts with i.e. The imagery of the cleansing of the entire church is not individual. What's most likely here is the parallel with first century marriage customs. Okay, so this kind of in verses 25 through 27, it has such a clear parallel to a marriage custom during the time of Jesus that actually was extrapolated even to the Greeks and sometimes into the Romans, that it's very possible that Paul is making that metaphor here. What he says about the Lord Jesus, how he gave himself up, he cleansed her by washing, that he would present her, that kind of stuff. He says, Hoyner says this in his commentary. He says, not only is this a metaphorical expression of redemption, but it evokes the imagery of the bridal bath. The bridal bath. Okay, what is the bridal bath? This is significant since the present passage deals with the relationship of the husband to the wife. The prenuptial bath in Jewish marital customs reflected the imagery of God's marriage to Israel related in Ezekiel 16. Okay, I'll leave that to you to go back and look at Ezekiel 16. At the time of her birth, Israel was in what a pitiable state, lying in blood, uncleansed by the washing of water, and was abhorred by all. That's depicted in Ezekiel 16, 4 through 6. When she grew up, God entered into a covenant with her, bathed her with water, washed off the blood, anointed her with oil, clothed her with the finest materials, making her exceedingly beautiful, fit to be a queen. The custom of prenuptial bathing seems to be practiced also among the Greeks, analogous to this bridal bath. The present verse relates that Christ's death on behalf of the church was to cleanse her by the washing of the water. Now, what does all of that mean? Okay, in plain English, the next couple of sentences describes what this bridal bath was. Normally, in an ancient Jewish wedding, the bride would prepare herself by washing in the bridal bath, after which the bridegroom would go and get his friends, bring his friends to her house to procure her and bring her to his house to present her to his father. Okay? In a similar manner, Christ prepares the bride, the church, okay, with the purpose that he might present her to himself. So the imagery is that the bride is somehow preparing herself by washing, a bridal bath. Okay, the bridegroom gets his friends and they do the procession, the ancient Jewish procession, where they're going to the bride's house to pick her up for the wedding ceremony. Okay, so she has bathed and she's ready. The bridegroom comes and takes her to her father's house and presents her to his father, as, here is my bride. Okay, so the picture of what's illustrated in these verses here, okay, so that he might sanctify her. And who's her? Her is the church here, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, an analogy to the bridal bath, so that he might present himself, the church, in all her glory. Presenting the church to the Father in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing. Okay, that gives you the idea of the completeness of that washing that Christ has performed on the church, so that she would be holy and blameless. Holy and blameless. So the forgiveness of all of our sins. I think it's just a wonderful picture that Paul is using here of what Christ has done in the bridal bath to represent his work on the church. Now, remember that what is happening later on in the book of Revelation, how is the church now portrayed in the later chapters? He's now presented as the bride of Christ, having gone through the marriage supper of the Lamb already, so that marriage ceremony has taken place, and the church is now presented in all her glory, spotless and clean because of the work of Christ, is presented as Christ's bride. It's almost like we're living now in the time of separation between, we've got our bridal bath to the church. We are waiting for the bridegroom to come and now take the church. And of course, the imagery is the same as in John chapter 14. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. Okay, he's also using the marriage illustration in John 14, and that's really a beautiful picture of the rapture of the church. Okay, so I'll let you read the section there. Again, going to the next section, 28 through 30, Paul, he kind of now, he's kind of finished with that Christological illustration there, that metaphor of the bath, and he starts to give reasons or things like that why we should love our wives as Christ loved the church. So in verse 28 says, so husbands ought also to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh. Interesting that he changes now from the word soma, which is translated body, to sarx, flesh, in the Greek. And possibly just in anticipation of his quotation of Genesis 2 that's coming up in verse 31. He says, he who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but he nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church, because we are members of his body. Okay, so Paul is telling us, love our wives. Why should we? Well, in a similar manner, or because we as men, we love our own bodies. We take care of our bodies. We spend time bathing and feeding and grooming and all that kind of stuff. We don't hate our own bodies. We love our bodies. We take care of them and all of that kind of stuff. And what Paul is saying here is that same commitment, that same zeal that we have to taking care of our own bodies ought to be applied to loving our wives also. Okay, we love ourselves. We ought to love our wives. It says no one ever hated his own body. And just by way of humor, I kind of put, all right, we should rephrase that. No man ever hated his own body. Okay, most women will say, oh, I hate my body. I would just want to lose 15 more pounds, or, I wish this, or I wish that, or blah, 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 blah. Women, they most of them are not satisfied with their bodies, but a woman that's finally content with her own body, it's a good thing to have. But probably doesn't, men never hate their own bodies, right? Usually. Yeah, I would like to lose some weight, but I don't hate my body. You might say I hate my body by putting it through the treadmill for 3 miles, and wreaking havoc on my old knees and that kind of stuff. But again, Paul, he switches terms here. He goes to the Greek sarx, which is flesh here. And I think it may be because he is now going to quote Genesis 2:24. He says, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. The two shall become one flesh. So it just seems that part of the tender care that Paul is telling we should take with our wives is not only because we don't hate our own bodies, but in a very real sense, when we got married, we became one flesh with our wife. Now, that just doesn't entail the intimate relationship, but sexual relationship. But it really is, two becoming one. I'll skip down there because the literal Greek reads, the two into flesh, one. Okay, two individual people somehow becoming one entity, a married couple that is stronger than the individuals. Now, I want to go back real quick. Here it comes. Excuse me. One final interesting textual variant that's in the text here that I always find interesting, and excuse me, it occurs at the end of verse 30. Does anyone have King James? Please read verse 30 for me, Jim. NASB says, because we are members of his body, and it ends there. Okay? King James has of his flesh and of his bones. Interesting. It's a textual variation in the old manuscripts. Okay? I'm a little bit perturbed that my NASB doesn't at least have it in brackets and give me a little footnote that says, the majority of manuscripts add this, because that is true. The vast majority of manuscripts have this addition of his flesh and of his bones. Yes, Jim. Chad is using.
It's also what the Southern Baptist Convention I can't remember what Lifeway. That's what Lifeway is producing. That's what they use down in Southern County. Working with the Trek program there for a while, we do a lot of scriptures. We all do it. I can't tell you how many times when I ask my clients to read something, they'll be like verse 15, 16, 18, 19, 20. I said, what happened to verse 17? I'm reading it in my Bible.
Right, yeah.
Where did verse 17 go? And so it's not in here. One of the other readers will come up and say, that is something that they have pulled out of this translation.
Yeah. It's a textual variant. Yep. Yep.
Now, the biggest me are things like when the NIV removes the blood out of Scripture. The NIV removes the blood of Christ. I think I've read something like 68 or 69 different times. That is in almost every other translation.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's not just textual, but to me, to remove the blood, which is what saves us, which is what covers us, that is almost
Well, it for the most part it is textual. The NASB has also been accused of systematically, removing verses with the deity of Christ and stuff. My approach is that I use all of the texts to if I want the majority text, when I'm studying for Sunday school, I use the NASB, but I also use the King James, knowing that represents the majority of the manuscripts, and the NASB represents the small, earliest manuscripts. One of these days, I'll do a couple of week introduction to textual criticism. I loved it in my seminary classes. To tell you the truth, I've got a mixed view because really, which is better? Is it the earliest that's best, or is it the majority of them that's best? And there was a very famous back and forth series of articles in Bibliotheca Thaca, or it may have been Jets, between Zane Hodges, who supports the majority text, and Gordon Fee, that would support the older texts. And you read the first 15, 20-page article, part 1, from Zane Hodges. You read that and you say, you know what? He makes a lot of good points. I believe the majority text is correct, the one that has the vast majority of the readings. And then the next month, Gordon Fee writes a rebuttal to that. I said, wow, he made some good points there. Maybe the earliest are better. Okay, and then part 3, Zane Hodges rebuttals the rebuttal. He says, well, you know, he really made some good points there. And by the end, they both say, look, this is a choice that you're going to make. And so my choices on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I think the older texts are better. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, the majority texts are better. And Sunday, whatever the pastor's preaching from is the one I want to read from, okay? I haven't decided on that. However, I have found that many times the criteria for why scholars believe the older manuscripts are better is arbitrary, because I think there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for why there aren't a lot of old, very old manuscripts that represent the majority text. I think there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for that, because those are the ones that were used and they wore out. Why don't we have a majority text that's from 200 AD? Because it was used. It wore out. There's a reason that most of the majority text stuff is 800, 900, you know, that kind of stuff. It's because these were copied and used. They were copied and used. They were copied and used, and they wore out. You know, how long will this Bible last you? 20 years, this is going to be all tore up and stuff. You're going to get a new one. I think that's what happened to the manuscripts, majority. Now, I recognize that, you know, it may have been a scribe's desire to make something that maybe was difficult in the Greek a little easier to understand. I get that, okay? I also get how, you know, some things, you know, got worded, you know, opposite and things like that. The whole way that textual variants occur, and that these were human beings that copied the text under poor lighting. And I mean, if that was your job, to copy a manuscript by hand day after day after day after day, you think you'd be perfect at that? I mean, it's just interesting things that happen in textual criticism. So I may do a 1-month class, show you some of the famous textual parts, like you got the ending of Mark that's in dispute. It's not in the earliest manuscripts, okay? But if you pull that out and you stop it where the early manuscripts stop, it just seems it leaves you hanging. It doesn't make any sense, okay? I think it belongs in there. And I would prefer a Bible that actually here in verse 31 gave me that extra text in brackets and say, hey, this edition is in the vast majority of manuscripts. I would like to know that. But anyway, so we may do that. Now, so the USB 3 Greek text that I use, it rates. They have a rating system, A, B, C, D. Okay, A meaning we're almost absolutely positive that the reading should be this. And all the way to D, wow, we're just guessing here. Okay, they rate this a B. So they're confident, but they're not going to put their life on the line to defend the omission of his flesh and of his bones. Now, does that fit here, of his flesh and of his bones? I think it fits perfectly, because he's going to quote Genesis 2:24 here. And what was the context there? It was marriage. You'd leave a father's mother, two will become one flesh. If you go back to Genesis 2, what is Adam's proclamation? He sees Eve and he says what? This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. It fits perfectly, right? I mean, it's not something out of the ordinary. If he's going to quote that, I mean, this foreshadows that. So anyway, one of these days, I may do that just for interest's sake, you know, it's 99.9% of what we have here doesn't involve a variation of any significance in the text whatsoever. There would be maybe, you know, one or two places in the New Testament where a spelling difference between manuscripts would translate to a different word. You know, a one little word or one little, you know, character change, and the word means something different, okay? And it's one of those things where, well, you know what? Either one of those two words makes sense in this context. We don't know which one it is, okay? Is it of a theological, doctrinal importance? Not at all. Not at all. Anyway, we'll do that someday, maybe. I don't know. I'll have to talk with the elders. The elders don't want, to cause too much confusion. I won't do it, but I find the topic fascinating. Let's get to the application part, because you can read the rest of this stuff. This mystery is great, but I am speaking with reference to Christ and the church. Each individual among you is to love his own wife even as himself, and the wife must see to it that she respects her husband. You can read what I wrote here. I think the translation into the term respect, I think, is a little bit light, because the verb is phobeo, okay? It means fear. And some translations use the word fear, but I don't think it's fear in the usual sense that we see it, fear of retribution and things like that. Obviously, that's not the kind of fear that a wife should have for her husband, okay? It's a reverential acknowledgement of his headship position in the family that I believe is what's being conveyed here. So here's the application. Again, Clinton Arnold, he's got a tremendous section on the practical aspects, and so let's look at those very quickly. I'll read the wives. Stop me if there's anyone that you want to discuss or stuff. But what does it mean to submit? Wives, what does it mean? Here are some of his suggestions. This does not mean that the wife loses her voice and decisions are made unilaterally. Okay, doesn't mean the husband makes every single decision and the wife has no say. It does not set up the wife for emotional, verbal, or physical abuse. Okay, there are some folks that actually, believe that it doesn't matter how you talk to your wife because she's supposed to take it by submitting. Okay, it's not what this means. Okay, she is to receive her husband's love, care, and provision. Provide encouragement, support, and input to her husband's initiatives to give vision and direction to the family. Here's one: to resist the temptation to take control. To resist the impulse to undermine or complain about the leadership her husband provides, and to align her spending habits with the priorities she agreed upon with her husband for the vision and direction of the household. Okay? Some good, solid suggestions about what it means for the wife to submit to her husband. Any thoughts on those? I know that was last week's thing. I didn't want to, jump on the men, because let me tell you, us men married, every single one of us is married in this room. This is going to be difficult to go through these practical suggestions. I'll tell you that right now. It's difficult because you're going to, some of them you're doing good on, and others, wow, failing miserably here. That's what I need to do better on. Any comment on the wives section? No comment from the wives? That's okay. All right. Husbands, what does it mean to love your wife as Christ loved the church? Okay. To grow in a willingness to deny himself to ensure his wife's well-being and care for his wife's well-being and care. Deny yourself. That's a tough one to do. Deny yourself on behalf of your wife. To care for her in a compassionate and loving way when she is sick. You got to learn how to make chicken noodle soup. It's not that hard. Care for her when she is sick, and I guarantee you she will appreciate it. To be willing to lovingly care for his wife as long as she would need it if she were to become disabled or terminally ill and could provide nothing to him in return. If anyone, both Donna and I are both taking care of elderly parents that need taking care of. So there's at least an idea of, what would that look like if something happened to Donna and I would have to care for her and she couldn't provide hardly anything in return. That's what that means for a husband to love his wife, no matter what, whether she physically or emotionally or mentally is even able to reciprocate or provide anything in return to the relationship. Okay? Here's also a tough one. Okay, men, we have problems too. To resist the impulse to spend money on things that are outside of the priorities that the two have established for the household. Okay? Going to Lowe's to buy a tool that you don't need, right? That's the thing that always, I don't use a lot of tools here and there, but boy, I wish I had a new set of those sockets or something like that. I got it in, English units. I wish I had it in metric units and, all that kind of stuff. So, but things that you would spend, new golf clubs or things like that. Now, is there a place for that? Of course there's a place for that. But, when you and your wife are focusing and moving your household finances in a certain direction for a certain goal and a certain purpose, kids' education or whatever the case may be, then we as husbands need to resist the temptation to give our own self-gratification of buying things that we want and at the same time restricting our wife's contribution to the purse strings and stuff. To be vigilant to guard against tones and languages that could wound his wife. That's an important one. Guard against that. To spend regular quality time with his wife and consistently make her feel precious to him. Okay? To take every precaution not to demean his wife by looking at other women in inappropriate ways and desiring them in his heart. Okay? Most men will struggle with that. Say, take every precaution against that. Okay? To deny, this is one, to deny himself of the desire to relax when his wife needs to talk or engage. Okay, the example that he gives, turn off the sports channel when his wife has an emotional need he should attend to. Okay, now some of us don't watch a whole lot of sports and that kind of stuff, but Relaxation after work, we get in this mode. Well, I deserve to be left alone to, spin down after a long, hard day of work. And so my need to relax and unwind comes before my wife's needs. That's easy for us as men to get into that mindset and stuff. To lead and not boss or rule. Okay, difference between leading and ruling and bossing around. To resist the temptation to any form of self-centered demanding. Okay, I want you to do this because that's what I want. Okay, whatever the case may be. To learn to discern his wife's needs and strive to meet them. Okay, giving that some thought occasionally. What would make my wife's life easier, more enjoyable, more fulfilling that I could do for her? What need could I meet that she needs met? This is a good one. To recognize his wife's giftedness and identify ways to support her and give her opportunity to express her gifts. Her spiritual gifts is what he's talking about here. To recognize and help develop her spiritual giftedness so that she can serve the body of Christ also. Okay, we tend to think that, our wives are only, hospitality, cleaning the house and cooking the meals and things like that. That's obviously her giftedness, whether it is or not. Okay, we would view as men, that should be what if they're a good teacher of children? Okay, what if they're excel in the gift of mercy and enjoy encouraging someone with a small gift or a note or things like that? We want to seek to recognize her giftedness and allow her to excel in that for the kingdom of God. To be responsible for seeking his wife's input on casting vision and direction for the family oriented around God's kingdom purposes. Kind of relates to her giftedness, but in a general sense. To take the initiative in conflict resolution. Okay, my wife will tell you, how does Dennis resolve conflicts? 2 words. He doesn't. He clams up. He'll sit there and not say a word and stew over it and mull over it for a couple of days, and then he'll say what's on his mind. Okay, that's probably not the best approach. We as men should be taking initiatives to resolve conflicts with our spouse. To concentrate on what this passage speaks about his role rather than to insist that his wife fulfill her role. Okay, so, which is we as men, well, my wife's not submitting to me. Well, are you loving her like Christ loved the church? That's what we as men and husbands should be focusing on. Let's do our part, and potentially if our wife is struggling to do her part, perhaps she'll come around if we're excelling at doing our part, loving her as Christ loved the church. So, you have any comments on this list? It's quite a list. If you're like me, I look and say, wow, I got a lot of work to do to honor my wife and love her as Christ loved the church. Lord willing, he'll give me the strength to be able to do that. So, comments. Someone's got to have some comment, or are we all just stunned? Oh, I'm so far away. Yeah, Chris. Yes. Yeah. Sure. Yep. And so what do? You apply the adage, happy wife, happy life. Right? Yes.
Praise God. I think, submits to me these 3 or 4 areas of conflict.
Right.
She reluctantly, but it just doesn't go without talking at it.
Sure. Right.
I've lost years of my life talking about that.
And if she's firmly convinced that you're wrong, the submission comes in and saying, all right, I'm going to submit to this, even though I think he's wrong, not hoping that she'll be proven right eventually in time, but she just recognized, my role in my God-ordained marriage here is to submit to my husband. And perhaps, some of that is not stewing about it or not reminding you, hey, that was your choice every couple of months if something doesn't go, whatever the thing is. But no, I mean, women have an equally difficult job with respect to submitting to their wives. And I think it's interesting that the command for the older women, what are they to teach the younger women? How to love their husbands. Okay, so there is a command implicit there to, that for wives to love their husbands. So I think it goes both ways, that we as husbands are to love our wives, but like it said in verse 21, we are to submit to one another. We should submit to our wives, okay, as a humble servant, okay, and also the wives do the same thing. They submit to their husbands, but they also love their husbands as Christ loved the church. There's precedent for that too. So everybody gets a piece of the humble pie this week, because these things, they're not natural to us as sinful human beings. They're not natural. Okay, we need to learn and ask for the Lord's guidance to help us do these things. So, final comments. I know we've gone a little bit extra time. I really wanted to cover those application. I think they're really good. All right. Class dismissed. Be back in about another month for kind of the two ending sections of Ephesians. And after that, I'm not sure what we're going to do up here. Okay.